ever wonder why you find it hard to express your emotions, or why you often pull away from people? This video delves into the world of avoidant attachment and exposes 5 surprising signs you might be experiencing it. Get ready for some self-discovery. Let me ask you something raw and real. Have you ever pushed someone away just when things started to feel good? Have you ever ghosted a conversation not because you didn't care, but because you cared too much and didn't know what to do with it? If you've ever felt safe in solitude but anxious in closeness, this isn't just personality. This might be your subconscious protecting you from connection. And today, we're going to shatter that wall. You ever wonder why you're constantly analyzing every little thing in your relationships? Why you replay that text over and over in your mind, or dissect someone's tone until it loses all meaning? You call it clarity. You think you're just being careful, discerning, wise. But let's get honest. Deep down, it's not clarity you're chasing. It's control. Control over your emotions. Control over how close someone can get to you. Control over the fear that's creeping in the moment someone starts to matter. This is one of the most subtle signs of avoidant behavior, one most people never recognize, because it's disguised as intelligence. You're not cold, you're logical. You're not distant, you're just protecting your peace. But the truth is, you're overthinking because you're afraid to feel. You might have to admit that someone got under your skin, someone touched a nerve, someone made you care. And caring, that makes you vulnerable. See, people with avoidant tendencies aren't heartless. In fact, they often feel too much. But they've trained themselves, whether through childhood dynamics, heartbreak, or disappointment, to manage those feelings through mental control, through overanalysis, through stepping back instead of leaning in. Every time someone texts you something affectionate, instead of receiving it with an open heart, your mind rushes to question, why did they say that? What do they want from me? Is this too soon? Are they trying to trap me? You're not listening to them anymore. You're listening to your fear. And that fear has a script. It says, love is dangerous. People will let you down. Get ahead of it. Don't get attached. Stay in control. But here's the kicker. Control is the illusion. You think you're managing your emotions, but you're actually starving them. You're robbing yourself of real intimacy because you convinced yourself that safety comes from distance. And distance might protect your heart, but it also keeps it lonely. When you're constantly analyzing a connection instead of experiencing it, you miss the moment. You miss the laughter, the spontaneity, the rawness. You're busy looking for warning signs when there are none. You sabotage the softness. You kill the warmth before it has a chance to grow. And the worst part, you call it clarity. But it's not clarity, it's fear wearing a mask. Fear that if you let go, you'll get hurt again. But the truth is, the deeper hurt is already happening. It's the disconnection you live with every day when you choose analysis over authenticity, when someone genuinely starts to love you. When they open their heart, show up consistently, speak to your soul. It should feel safe, grounding, maybe even healing. But for the avoidant person, it feels the exact opposite. It feels like a trap, not because the person is doing something wrong, but because closeness itself activates something buried deep inside. Fear, pressure, suffocation. Love doesn't land as safety, it lands as overwhelm. What most people don't realize is that avoidants often want love. They crave intimacy just like everyone else. They long for connection, but only in theory. Because when it finally arrives, when someone starts seeing through the mask, the old emotional alarm bells start to ring, and they ring loud. The very thing they've been waiting for, affection, attention, consistency, now feels too much, too intense, too close. The heart says yes, but the nervous system screams run. That's why you'll often hear avoidants say things like, I just need space, or I'm not ready, or even I don't know why, but something feels off. The truth is, it's not the person that feels off. It's the experience of being seen, because to be truly seen means risking rejection. It means opening the door to hurt. And that's a door the avoidant mind has spent a lifetime trying to keep shut. So instead of leaning into love, avoidance creates space. They distance. They downplay their feelings. They rationalize reasons to pull away, not because they're selfish or manipulative, but because their entire inner world equates intimacy with danger. Love isn't soothing, it's triggering. Emotional closeness activates old pain, even if the current partner is safe. And that's the heartbreaking paradox. Love becomes the enemy, not because of what it is, but because of what it represents. People with avoidant tendencies often grew up in environments where vulnerability wasn't safe, where love came with strings or wasn't dependable or disappeared when they needed it most. So now, as adults, even healthy love feels suspect. When someone offers warmth, their system flinches. When someone gets close, they retreat, not because they don't care, but because caring threatens the fragile safety they've built through distance. They don't feel free in love, they feel cornered. They confuse affection with obligation, vulnerability with weakness. And instead of letting love be a place to rest, they treat it like a battlefield, one where they must always be on guard, always strategizing, always prepared to retreat. And until they recognize this pattern, they'll keep running from good people, from deep connection, and most painfully, from themselves. I don't need anyone. I've got this on my own. Depending on people only leads to disappointment. These phrases might sound like strength. They might look like confidence, but more often than not, they're armor, emotional shields worn by those with avoidant tendencies. Independence becomes a fortress. You build it high, brick by brick, thinking it makes you untouchable, and in many ways it does. You don't get hurt, you don't rely on anyone, you don't owe anyone anything. But here's what no one tells you. That same fortress also becomes a prison. Avoidants romanticize independence because it gives them control. They tell themselves that needing someone is weak, that vulnerability equals danger, and that the only way to avoid pain is to rely solely on themselves. But that mindset doesn't come from power, it comes from pain. It comes from experiences where dependence led to betrayal, where asking for help was met with rejection, or where emotional needs were labeled as too much. And so the avoidant response is to shut it all down. Be strong, be self-sufficient, be unshakable. But here's the thing, nobody was designed to do this life alone. Emotional connection is not a flaw in the system, it is the system. Human beings are wired for bonding, for reciprocity, for closeness. And when you strip that away in the name of independence, what you're left with is a hollow version of strength. You might be productive, you might be respected, you might be admired for how together you seem, but inside you're disconnected, emotionally isolated, and often deeply exhausted from carrying the entire weight of your inner world alone. Interdependence is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's the courage to say, I've got me, but I'm not afraid to let you in too. It's knowing your worth doesn't shrink when you allow someone to support you. It's understanding that love isn't about losing freedom, it's about expanding it. When someone truly sees you and still chooses you, not because you're perfect, not because you don't need them, but because you're real, that's not a threat. That's a gift. But avoidants struggle to receive it. They associate closeness with control. They believe letting someone in means surrendering power, so they push people away, not with cruelty, but with silence, with distraction, with 100 tiny acts of emotional distancing that say, I'm fine on my own. And yes, maybe they are. But fine isn't thriving. Fine isn't deep joy. Fine isn't love. Real power doesn't come from being untouchable. It comes from being reachable, from standing in your truth and still letting someone walk beside you, not behind you, not in front of you, but with you. And until you allow that, independence will keep you safe, but it will also keep you alone. Have you ever told someone you missed them only to ignore their next message? Have you ever planned a date, felt excited, then suddenly canceled it without even understanding why? This is the roller coaster avoidants often live on, not because they don't care, but because they care so much it becomes terrifying. They send mixed signals, not to manipulate, but to manage an overwhelming internal conflict. The deep desire for love constantly colliding with an equally deep fear of losing control. Avoidants often confuse themselves and the people around them. One moment they're leaning in, sharing something real, making you feel like you're finally breaking through their wall. Then, just as quickly, they retreat. They disconnect. They change the subject, become busy, or withdraw emotionally. To the person on the receiving end, it feels personal. It feels like rejection. But what's actually happening is that the avoidant has reached their emotional edge. They've let someone get just close enough to trigger a protective reflex that says, "This is dangerous, shut it down before you get hurt." This push-pull dynamic isn't a game. It's a coping mechanism. The avoidant isn't trying to be inconsistent. They're trying to manage closeness in doses they feel they can survive. The problem is, love doesn't thrive in inconsistency. Relationships need trust, and trust needs presence. But presence, true, open, emotional presence, feels threatening to someone who spent years protecting their vulnerability. So the avoidant sends signals of interest, then vanishes. They'll reach out late at night when loneliness hits, but won't return texts in the morning when intimacy feels too real. They'll flirt, connect, even open up, then later act like none of it happened. Not because it didn't matter, it mattered too much. But instead of facing that emotion, they create confusion. They hide behind ambiguity. They say things like, "I'm just not sure," or "I don't want to rush." Not because they're indifferent, but because clarity feels like commitment, and commitment feels like loss of freedom. The emotional whiplash they create often reflects the storm within. One part of them is craving intimacy and another part is running from it. And until they recognize this inner war, they will continue sending mixed signals, not just to others, but to themselves. They will keep people guessing, not because they want to be chased, but because they're scared of being captured. Not in a physical sense, but emotionally, psychologically. Because being fully known means being fully vulnerable, and to the avoidant mind, that's the ultimate risk. But what they don't realize is that this back and forth doesn't just protect them, it exhausts them. It drains the connection. It builds walls higher than they ever intended, and it leaves them wondering, every time someone walks away, why they still feel so alone. When conflict shows up in a relationship, many people see it as an opportunity to understand each other better, to heal wounds, to grow stronger together. But for someone with avoidant tendencies, conflict doesn't feel like a door to deeper connection. It feels like a threat, a trap, a situation that must be escaped at all costs. So they do what they've learned to do best: shut down, withdraw, and avoid. Avoidants aren't necessarily afraid of anger or yelling. What they fear most is emotional exposure. They fear being asked questions they don't know how to answer. They fear being pressed to talk about feelings they haven't even admitted to themselves. So when a disagreement arises, even a minor one, they tend to retreat. They'll say things like, "Let's not talk about this now," or "This is too much," or they'll just go quiet. Disappearing becomes a strategy. Silence becomes a weapon, not of harm, but of self-protection. But here's the paradox. In avoiding conflict to preserve peace, they create more distance. They may tell themselves, "If I just stay quiet, this will blow over," or "If I don't respond, I won't make it worse." Yet the very act of shutting down sends a powerful message to the other person. You don't matter enough for me to stay present. And that's rarely the truth. The truth is, the avoidant feels overwhelmed, out of control, like any misstep could lead to emotional chaos, so they opt out. The problem is, real relationships aren't built on avoidance, they're built on repair. Conflict is natural, disagreement is human, but avoidance of those moments kills intimacy. It leaves things unresolved, unsaid, and slowly eats away at trust. What the avoidant doesn't always realize is that their silence is louder than any argument. Their retreat is felt deeply. It's not neutral, it's rejection. And over time it builds resentment, both within their partner and within themselves, because even the avoidant begins to feel the cost. They start to feel like they're always one conversation away from losing someone. They become emotionally isolated, trapped by their own defenses. They long for connection, but fear the messiness that comes with it. So they choose distance again and again, thinking it will save them, when in reality it's keeping them stuck. Avoiding conflict might keep things calm on the surface, but underneath it builds pressure. It creates emotional tension that eventually explodes or silently suffocates the relationship. What feels like safety in the short term becomes suffering in the long term. And until the avoidant learns to sit in discomfort, to stay present when it's hard, they'll keep losing the very connections they secretly crave. Because love doesn't require perfection, it requires presence, especially when things get hard. So here's the truth. The kind that doesn't sugarcoat, doesn't flinch, and doesn't let you hide. If you saw yourself in any of these 5 signs, if you overanalyze connection, feel smothered by love, glorify independence, send mixed signals, or avoid conflict like it's the plague, it doesn't mean you're broken. It means you've been protecting yourself in the only way you knew how. Avoidant behaviors aren't character flaws, they're survival strategies. They're the emotional armor you built to make it through pain, abandonment, or neglect. But just because that armor once served you doesn't mean you still need to carry its weight. There comes a point when protection turns into limitation, and if you're here now, reading this, feeling that stir inside, that moment has arrived. Avoidant tendencies can trick you into believing that solitude is safety, that silence is strength, and that distance equals peace. But that's not peace. It's emotional exile. That's not freedom. It's fear in disguise. Real connection doesn't trap you, it meets you. It doesn't erase your individuality, it expands it. But to experience that kind of love, the kind that holds you, sees you, and challenges you, you have to do the thing that feels most unnatural. Stay present when your instinct is to run. Stay open when your impulse is to shut down. Stay engaged even when your nervous system says this is too much. Because only through presence can you begin to unlearn the story that closeness equals danger. Healing the avoidant wound isn't a switch, it's a process. It starts with noticing your patterns without judgment. It grows through courageous self-inquiry, and it deepens when you begin to choose something new. When you lean into discomfort instead of retreating. When you express instead of analyze. When you trust, not because it feels safe, but because you've decided you are safe now. You no longer need to live as a version of yourself shaped entirely by fear. You get to evolve, you get to open, you get to experience love not as a battlefield, but as home. So the question now is not just, are you an avoidant? The question is, are you willing to stop running? Are you ready to step out from behind your carefully built walls and into the life, the love, and the intimacy you've always said you wanted, but were too afraid to let in? Because the moment you do, everything changes. Not all at once, not perfectly, but truthfully. And that kind of truth, it's what finally sets you free. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch, reflect, and grow with this message. If something in this speech spoke to you, if it stirred something real, something honest, know that it's a sign you're ready to break old patterns and step into deeper connection with yourself and with others. I appreciate your presence here more than you know. Your journey matters, your healing matters, and every step you take towards self-awareness is a powerful act of courage. If you found value in this content, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with someone who might need to hear it too. Subscribe to the channel for more content that goes straight to the heart, raw, real, and ready to transform. Thank you again for being here. Until next time, take care of your heart, and goodbye for now.